You're listening to the Rethreading Madness podcast, which airs live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We are recorded and produced on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to our show.
I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through.
Narcissism is a psychological term that is categorized in the DSM as a psychiatric disorder. The DSM clinically outlines it as a mental condition where people have an inflated sense of their importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, has troubled relationships, lacks empathy for others, and while displaying extreme confidence, they have a very fragile self-esteem that overreacts to even the slightest criticism. Only a licensed diagnostician can legitimately apply a label of narcissism. That said, out here in the world of laymen like myself, it is a word that is often used to refer to somebody who is self-centered and demanding that all focus be on themselves to the exclusion of the needs of others, which most often leaves people emotionally demolished in their wake. Why is it important for us to understand why we are dealing with even an undiagnosed narcissist? Because A, like the sociopath, the narcissist with their specific sense that they can do no wrong is more than not unlikely to attend therapy and therefore remain undiagnosed throughout their lives. And B, the impact of living with or being in a relationship with somebody who is a narcissist leaves one bewildered and confused and often in emotional agony. To find our way out of that quagmire, we need a framework to be able to pull the pieces apart and then put our lives back together. Today, I'm chatting with Rebecca, a Vancouver native who lives just steps from the seawall in Stanley Park. She splits her time between working as a college instructor, running her own business, cooking up a storm in the kitchen, and tracking down the best baked goods this city has to offer. We are going to be chatting about her first-hand experience of being in a relationship with a narcissist. You're listening to Rethreading Madness. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm sitting down virtually with Rebecca, who has experienced dealing with and having a relationship with somebody she believes has narcissism. And so, Rebecca, I wanted to ask you that really sort of general, vague description I just said. Does that match your experience?
I mean, I think it's important to remember that, like a lot of mental health disorders out there in the world, there's a spectrum, right? There's a continuum from one to the other. And one thing that I've kind of started to realize and understand and recognize quite recently is that there are different types of narcissism. You know that new Taylor Swift song that's out right now? And in it, she makes a reference to this thing called covert narcissism. And I think that's the kind of narcissism that I had the experience with. So I think
define that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people think about a narcissist as being someone who has an overinflated sense of themselves. And I do think that that's true. And partly it's true for people because they need that overinflated sense of themselves because they really are in reality so incredibly insecure that they create this kind of persona for themselves that's outside of themselves. And that's kind of their, their outside, although on their inside, they're really, really, they're very insecure. The idea of a covert narcissist, is somebody who almost is more of a victim. So I'll give you an example for me personally, in my life and in this relationship that I was in. This particular person, he was so interesting to me. When we first met, he had been married and he was divorced. And I said, these are questions that you ask your partner when you first meet them, right? I was like, what happened to your relationship? Why did you get divorced? And there's this whole story about his ex-wife and all of the things that she did to him. And at the end of the day, it turned out that none of those things were actually true, right? So it's almost like a technique to get them to feel sorry for you, and in that way be like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, like that you had this terrible life, or that you had a terrible childhood, or whatever that looks like, and I'm going to be part of your healing. Like I'm going to kind of take care of you. And that's how they kind of get that narcissistic supply.
Right. Yes. And that is an important word in this, which we'll get to later on, but absolutely. So if I'm hearing you right, the person that you were in a relationship with set himself up to appear to be the victim in something horrendous. I'm assuming it was quite horrendous, leaving you in a place to feel emotionally responsible in some ways.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah. And I think also, and this is kind of important, this is an important piece of me and where I come from personally, is that I grew up in the kind of home where, you know, and this is a fairly general statement for women. I think in general, women generally are socialized to be the caregiver. We're socialized to take care of everyone around us and to always put our own needs last. And
Yes.
that's kind of a general statement for a lot of women and how they're raised. But for me, in my childhood and how I was raised specifically, that was really, really the case, you know? And so when I came to this place where I met this person, and the other thing is that, you know, I genuinely believed that this person was my person and that I was going to be with this person for the rest of my life. And so there was a certain amount, I felt a certain amount of responsibility to take care of him and to make the relationship work.
Right. Yeah, actually, that old way of thinking about what women should be in the world and how we should be, when you said it and how you said it, made me realize that we're a narcissist dream. Like we are completely set up to be consumed by them.
Yeah. And what I've learned, and I know this is like not to jump ahead by any means, but what I've learned about myself in the past, you know, 4 or 5 years since I ended the relationship, is that I'm a sitting duck for people like this because of who I am,
right?
And because of my personality and all of those things. Like I grew up in a household where, you know, we were really taught to be people pleasers. And so I grew up in a world where I have some pretty serious people pleasing tendencies. And that's something that I'm really working on very hard right now, you know, so things like being a people pleaser. Also, I'm extremely empathetic. I work in a very, you know, in a world where empathy is a really important part of my skill set. I'm very sensitive to other people's emotions and how they feel, right? And so all of those things are things that a narcissist, that's like catnip, you know, like that's exactly what they're looking for, all of those things.
So what happened in the breadth of your relation? How long were you with this person?
Probably around 18 months, something like that.
So in those 18 months, he started out being the victim and hooking you in emotionally there. What else happened?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that happened. So when I met this person, first of all, to be really clear, like it started out amazing, right? So when I met him, we had amazing chemistry right off the bat, like really amazing chemistry. There were so many things about him that I was really attracted to. We, you know, our relationship started off with a bang, and it was really strong, and we had a lot of stuff in common. And you know, he was he gave me a lot of attention. There was a lot of attention sent my way. There were gifts, expensive gifts. There were trips, like there were all of these things. And I was in this relationship with this person. And I was like, oh my God, this is everything I've ever wanted. Like, this is everything I've ever looked for. All of these things. This person sees me for who I am. He accepts me. He understands me. He's giving me all of these like expensive present. Like, I'm not a very materialistic person, to be honest with you. The attention is more important to me than the gifts, but still it was like, holy cow, like no one had ever kind of bought me, these kinds of like expensive things before. Like, it was a really big deal. And so I think it's really important to notice that the relationship started out really, really strongly. And then maybe after probably about 3 or 4 months in, I started to feel this almost like a sense of maybe kind of a bit of a withdrawing. And I felt like I spent, somewhere between 3 and 6 months until the end of our relationship. So, maybe the first 3 to 6 months of our relationship was really, really wonderful. But then I felt like I spent the last year of our relationship kind of trying to chase the dragon to use
I get that.
To use
Actually,
a drug term.
That's a perfect term.
Right? Like trying to get back to that place where we were at the beginning, where everything was so amazing. And, I just want to say, I understand that in relationships, there's always a honeymoon phase. I totally get that. And the honeymoon phase is fun, but I don't, it's the stuff that comes afterwards that's really the important part of the relationship. Like, that's where, you really get into the meat of it. And can you genuinely be two people who are going to be together? Right. And but I just want to be clear that this went far beyond a honeymoon phase. Like, this was inflated. And what I learned afterwards was this is a very specific technique that narcissists use to drag someone, to capture someone and to bring them into their orbit. And it's called love bombing. And it's a completely documented and well-known technique that narcissists use to rope you in. And then you're kind of and I know I said like chasing the dragon, and I said it kind of jokingly, but it's not wrong, because it is connected to things like dopamine levels. When you think about those first few months when you're in that relationship, you have this kind of high, like it is a kind of high. And then all of a sudden, like, it was gone. And I kept trying to like get back to that place again. And it just never went back to that place again. Right.
So I'm just going to cut in here, because I do want to talk a little bit about what you just said. I mean, this is actually documented theory that's been put out there by different psychologists and psychiatrists. Dr. Porges, and I may have said his name wrong, but he talks about how that kind of love bombing actually does increase your dopamine levels. And by doing that, you are doing exactly the same thing that people do when they take a drag off a cigarette or take a drug, right? It increases your dopamine levels and you become addicted to it. And so what they're saying is that you can become addicted to relationships in the same way. So we see it with folks I do support with around therapy abuse, that the therapist has in fact done some of that same stuff, that love bombing, the attention, all of that stuff. And the person ends up, kind of addicted to them through that process. So thank you for mentioning that, because I think people don't totally understand how physical that relationships can become, that you become physically connected in very profound ways. So eventually things changed. Do you remember what changed? What made it change? Was there a trigger, or did it just suddenly one day it was not the same?
I don't know that there was a trigger. So
okay.
during that love bombing stage, those first few months of the relationship, I just want to be clear, there were definite red flags. So there were definite red flags. So like, for example, I had someone slip into my DMs and say, this person that you're dating, he's my boyfriend. I'm dating him. Right. And I went to him and I was like, what the heck is this? And he was like, yeah, you know what? I'm really sorry. This is someone that I had seen a few times, but I hadn't like cut it off with her properly. So like, let me go and handle that. And I was like, okay, all right. Like I could accept that.
Mm-hmm.
But then this one time I was, one of my girlfriends texted me and she's like, are you still seeing that guy? And I was like, what guy? And she's like, you know, that guy. And she told me his name and I was like, yeah, I'm still seeing him. And she's like, oh, that's interesting because I just matched with him online on a dating site. And I was like, that's weird. He told me he took down all of his dating profiles. And so I actually, believe it or not, I actually ended the relationship at that moment with him. But he came up with some kind of a lie. I don't know if it was a lie. I don't know exactly how much of it was a lie, but there was an explanation. Let's just say that way. There was an explanation that he gave me this explanation. And the thing about being in a relationship with someone is that you have to trust them.
Yes.
So if that person is lying to you and you have kind of spidey senses that are saying, I don't know about this, you may doubt your own intuition, because if you accept that this person is lying to you, the relationship is over, because you can't build a relationship without trust. So I chose, and, you know, when I look back at it now, I'm like, oh my God, you were such an idiot, but, you know, whatever. You know, when I look back at it now, I think, I can't believe that I swallowed that, but I do also understand why I did it. I did it because I didn't have any other choice to not trust him, even if he was out and out lying to me. For me to not trust him, the relationship would have had to been over. And by that time, I was deep enough in that I didn't want the relationship to be over. And I thought this was my person. And I thought we were going to be together forever.
Right.
And part of the reason I thought that was because those were things that he was saying to me. He was like, oh, you know, we're going to be together. We're going to get married. I don't know if he said we're going to get married, but, you know, like that kind of thing. Right. Like we had those talks. And it's interesting because, and again, I didn't learn any of this stuff until after I ended the relationship with him. But another term that I learned after the fact was this term called future faking. And future faking is another technique that narcissists use to reel people in. And basically what future faking is it's saying to the person what they think you want to hear. So, you know, like this stuff about we're going to get married, we're going to live together, we're going to be together forever, we're going to be old people on the porch together in whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And that is, again, another very well-documented technique. And that was definitely a technique that was used on me for sure.
Right. You're listening to Rethreading Madness. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm chatting with Rebecca about her firsthand experience of a person with narcissism. Rebecca, was there a cycle to what you experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the stuff that we were talking about earlier, about that kind of cycle of like drug dependency, it definitely existed in my relationship. And for me, and I know it's probably different for everyone, but for me, the behavior was that there was a specific pattern of behavior that I would see with him. So let me just give you an example. It was my birthday. Okay. And I think I said something to him like, I don't need you to make a big deal about my birthday, you know, whatever kind of thing. But having said that, I think I expected that, you know, he would do something for me for my birthday. Like I didn't need for it to be a big deal, but I, you know, probably wanted to spend time with him or maybe go for dinner or something. And on my birthday, he sent me a text in the morning that said happy birthday. And then that was it. I didn't really hear from him at all for the rest of the day. And it turned out that he spent that day, my birthday, rescuing, quote unquote. And again, this is just what he told me. So it could have been a complete and utter lie. I don't know, but I'll just tell you what he told me because that's all I have to go on. He is from another country that is not Canada, and someone who was from that country was traveling. This person was here in Vancouver. They had ended up at like one of the youth hostels downtown, and they were like sick or something. And so he went to take care of this person who was a complete stranger, instead of coming and doing stuff with me for my birthday. And I was like, what? Like, I couldn't quite wrap my brain around why he would choose to spend the day with a complete stranger than spending the day with me. And then, so this was like kind of the pattern of our relationship. So he would kind of ghost me, essentially. So this happened many times where he would kind of ghost me. That's just one example, the birthday. And then the next time he would like show up. So then the next day after my birthday, he showed up at my door with like flowers and cake and all these gifts and all this stuff. Right. So it really created this real roller coaster, or this real cycle where he would kind of ghost me, right? So he would do things like, he would say, like literally he would say, I'll be at your house at 8:00 tonight. And then I wouldn't hear from him again the rest of the night. He just would not respond to his phone. He wouldn't text me. But then
so he would say, I'm going to be there at 8 p.m. and then just not show up.
That would just not show up.
Right.
Nothing. And then like the next day or 2 days after, he would text me and he would say, oh, my phone died, or my car died, or whatever, and then there would be a big, I'm sorry, and blah, blah, blah. And I would just like, I would have a boundary with him. I would say, you can't do that. You can't call me and say, I'm going to be at your house at a certain time, and then just never show up. That's not okay. You cannot do that. And that was a boundary that I had with him that he crossed many times. And then one time he just crossed it one time too many. And that was the breaking point for me. I was just like, that's it. I'm done. I'm out.
How did you feel? Because this has been a while now since this happened. Looking back, what was the impact on you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when I first met him, I was at a really high point in my career. I had a fairly prestigious teaching job at a local university. My first book was about to be published. It was like published right around that time that I met him. Like I was on a real high. Like I was feeling very successful. I was feeling very, very strong. My self-esteem was really high. I felt really good about myself. And what happened was, by the end of that time, I was not doing great. I was not doing great. I'll be honest with you.
In terms of what, your self-esteem, or
my mental health in general, like I was pretty depressed, not just for that reason, but there were some other reasons why I was feeling pretty down on myself.
Right.
Like for example, it's so funny to say this, and I'm fine now. It's like, whatever. But, it was my first book was being published, and I guess I had hopes that my book was going to be a bigger success. And by success, I mean, sell more copies. You know what I mean? Like, I think I'm successful. I wrote a book, like,
it's a big deal to write a book.
I wrote a book. A publisher paid me money to write a book. Right. So, I mean, that's a success in and of itself. And so, I've sort of managed, I've processed through that. But at the time, I think I was kind of down on myself because I had all these goals and they just weren't coming to fruition in the way that I wanted them to. And by the same token, I felt like I was trying so hard to make this relationship work, and yet it wasn't working. Right. And I put entirely most of the blame, not all of the blame, but probably most of the blame for my relationship not working, I put on myself. I just kept saying to myself, if I can just find the right words to communicate with him, he's going to understand what I'm saying and where I'm coming from. Right. And he's going to make these changes that I need him to make in order for me to feel like I can still be in this relationship. Right. I was never able to do that. Right.
Right. Were you able to emotionally connect with him? Was there a way of, did you feel that I suppose if the love bombing
Mm-hmm.
was real, then that would be a real connection. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure it is real, although it
Yeah.
feels really lovely and you want to hang on to that because that was the best part. But did you feel emotionally connected to him?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, I mean, I was definitely in love with him. I definitely felt like this was my person. We were going to be together forever. But, um, I thought he felt the same way as well. But the reality is that I now know that he was just also really good at saying to me the things that I wanted to hear. So how
Right.
much of it was real and how much of it was not,
Yeah.
I don't know. I can tell you how real it was on my side, but on his side, I don't know. So on my side, I was only going by the things that he was telling me, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. Did he uh, encourage you to lose friends or family or break away from people? Was that a part of what happened for you?
no, I don't think so. But I will say that I did have a sense of shame in talking to my friends about the problems in my relationship. And I
Right.
have really wonderful, super good friends that do not judge me and will not ever, judge me in that way. But
Hmm.
so that's no reflection on my friends. That's a reflection on me and myself. And that I felt a sense of shame. I felt like I can't talk to anyone about this because I feel like I'm a failure, you
Right.
know?
So it was because of you that the relationship wasn't working. And that's certainly one of the things that happens to people. Did he say anything or do anything that encouraged you to take full responsibility? Or was this something that goes back into our lifetimes of training as children growing up as
Yeah.
females? I'm never quite sure.
Yeah.
But I know that people with narcissism don't always apologize or take responsibility. They're
Yeah.
so full of their own sense of wonderfulness that they don't see that they've done anything wrong. Was he able to take responsibility for anything or say, no, 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 Rebecca, it's not your fault. I did this wrong.
I think that a big part of narcissistic relationships is that they're really, really good at turning the tables. So, like, if you go to a narcissist and you say, hey, listen, these are the things that I need you to take responsibility for, they're going
Mm-hmm.
to figure out some way to twist that around so that you become the one that takes the responsibility
Right.
for it
Right. And apologize. So
and
you and
apologize.
apologize. Yes.
And I definitely had that experience some of the time for sure. Like I would say to him, like you can't do this thing where you ghost me, where you say you're going to show up and then you don't. And he would say to me, well, but that's my business. Like I was out having drinks with some guys and it was a business thing. And that's really important to me. And you don't support me in my business.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
like that's how it got turned around
Yep.
to be my fault. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep. Yeah. And
Um,
that's a form of psychological manipulation and
mhm,
gaslighting, right?
mhm.
So you end up, start really clear about this is a boundary. And by the end of it, you're not really sure where the boundary
Mhm.
is that you were trying to put out there. And you end up feeling, I would imagine, feeling bad that you were a bad partner, that you weren't supporting him.
And I think, yeah, absolutely. But for me, I think the biggest impact that it had on me, on my mental health and that kind of thing, is that by the time I finally was able to get free of that relationship, I felt like my own belief, my own trust in myself was
Mm-hmm.
so eroded that I didn't trust myself anymore.
Right.
We talk about like intuition is so important, gut feelings, so important. And up until that time, I'd always been, pretty sensitive to that and listened to my gut. But by the time I got out of that relationship, I had no faith. I had no trust in myself anymore
Right.
because I would say things to him or I would have a gut feeling or an intuition about something. And there was always an explanation. There was always a reason why. There was always some reason why my gut was wrong. And the reality is that my gut was right all of those times, but he
Right.
was just a really good liar and was able to make up stories and to make excuses for everything.
Yeah. And I think that that is one of the most damaging things that happens when you're in a relationship with somebody where your own sense of what's true, you deny it. It's in the act of denying what you know is
Mhm.
true to accept somebody else's version for
Mhm.
whatever reason, and then to find out later that what you thought was true all along was exactly what you say. And some people would think, well, then you should feel good. You should be able to say, I was right all along. But there's
Mhm.
something really profound that happens when you make that choice not to listen to yourself.
Mhm.
Right? That
Yeah.
is so profoundly damaging. And it's like a
Yeah.
betrayal of your own self.
It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Very hard. Um, did you feel like you had to keep him happy? And
Like that he would leave me unless I kept him
yeah, and
happy.
then that's part of the cycle, right? The love bombing and then the
Yeah.
devaluing and then discarding and then back to love
Yeah.
bombing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stuff. Did he say that he was going to leave at any point, or say if you're not, and this is not uncommon that people, you're not making
No,
me happy, this isn't what I want. Um
I don't, in my particular case, I don't think so. Like, I can't remember
that's okay.
any, like, maybe there was, you know what I mean? But I do think that there was definitely a devaluing sort of cycle that went on there for sure.
Right.
And there was definitely a cycle whereby, again, I would say to him, this is my boundary. You can't cross this boundary. And he would cross the boundary. But then I would say to him, this is my boundary. You can't cross the boundary. And it would be like, I'm sorry, you're right, blah, blah, blah. I'll do better next time. But, it just never changed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And ultimately, I just got to the point where I was like, after this happened 3 or 4 times, I was like, I can't, it's him or me. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, ultimately, at the end of the day, I chose myself.
Yes, and honestly, a year and a half in to do
I
that
know.
and be able to move away is profoundly wonderful, because a lot
I
of people by 18 months are
know.
so
I know.
entrapped emotionally into that cycle that it's really, really hard for them to even see what's going on anymore.
I know.
Were you able to question him? Because I know for some narcissists, having any kind of question,
Yeah.
makes them just blow up and they become horrible
I mean,
because
I think yes, but the reality is I never knew what was coming out of his mouth was the truth or not,
right,
right? So interestingly, after I finally had the courage to end it, and trust me, it took me a really, really long time to get there. One day I was browsing on YouTube and I stumbled across this YouTube channel by this psychologist, and her name is Dr. Romani, and she very specifically talks about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. And I stumbled across this video that she had on YouTube, and I felt the penny drop. Like, it was
right.
almost a physical thing.
I'm sorry. We need to take a little break, Rebecca, but we'll be right back, folks.
Sure.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm chatting with Rebecca about narcissism. And I want to talk with her now about how did you get from where you were when you left the relationship to where you are now? And you talked about finding a video of Dr. Romani
Yeah.
on YouTube.
So I'll be honest with you. When I ended the relationship, I was really down on myself. I was down on myself because I thought it was all my fault. I thought I was the one, even though I was the one that walked away from the relationship, I thought it's my fault. I'm the one that's at fault here. I was unable to make this relationship work. And so I really struggled with that. It was really hard. I thought, I'm a broken person. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but there's something wrong with me. I'm a broken person. I'm never going to be able to have a relationship again. Like, that was honestly, that was where my head was at.
Right.
And then I stumbled across this video from Dr. Romani, and I was like, what what is this? And I immediately kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I watched a bunch of her videos, and I started reading, and I started listening to podcasts, and I started, sort of going down this whole journey. And it was crazy how much of my relationship, fit into this pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, this is it. Like, this is what it was. And it was such a revelation to me, and it was so validating, because it was like, okay, all right. And again, I just want to be really clear. I'm a very imperfect and messy human being. Like, I have childhood trauma that I'm dealing with, like I'm a very messy and imperfect human being. But I still, for me, the most important thing in my life is for me to take responsibility for my childhood trauma and to look at that. And for me, I think the most important role that I have in my own life is trying to be mindful of the things that I do and how I react.
Right.
And to understand if when I'm reacting to something in a situation, am I reacting to that thing because of my trauma? Am I reacting to that thing because of something that has happened to me in the past because of how I was raised, right? Like
Right.
that is my life's goal right now. So I just want to say, for the record, I am not perfect. I'm sure that I made mistakes, and I'm not by any means, blaming everything on him. And additionally, who knows what kind of childhood trauma he had that got him to that place where that was how he was reacting. And I'm not giving him a pass, to be very clear. I am not giving him a pass, but I am aware, and I do have empathy enough to understand that people do things in their adulthood because of the things that have happened to them as children.
So I just want to stop there just a tad, because we do know about narcissism is that it's a product of your environment. It's a product of your genetics, and it's a product of your nurturing, and or one of the other, right? So when it comes to nurturing, that portion of it, they say it can come, this is so interesting to me, it can happen because you had parents who neglected you and didn't take care of you or abused you. But it also can happen if you have parents who dote on you and think you are so wonderful and great and so I kind of discount the nurturing or part of it, because I'm not sure how something can happen out of those two extremes. I suppose it can, but I tend to throw it out. I tend to look more at narcissism as something about wiring and the inability of that part of your brain that has empathy for other people to light up and be present. But that's just me, and I'm not a therapist. So let's get back to what you were talking about. I think that people who take responsibility, who are like you, have recognizing that they're not a perfect human being and want to at least grow in this lifetime and not perpetuate stuff, are like how we were trained as kids to be the woman and the caretaker. And that part of it is also makes you a sitting duck for a narcissist, right? Who doesn't want to take responsibility, who is in ways incapable of taking responsibility because they see themselves in such a inflated sense of wonderful.
I guess for me, the healing process has been really a lot about educating. It's just been a lot of processing. The other thing that I want to say is that if you're involved in a relationship with a narcissist and you are feeling, and I just want to be really clear, narcissism is abusive. It's a form of emotional abuse. And I want to be really clear about that. And I also want to be really clear that emotional abuse is every bit as damaging as physical abuse.
Yeah.
So
even more so at times.
And I also want to say that a lot of times the things that we know and some of the stuff that I've read is that emotional abuse often leads to physical abuse. And the reason why is because what the narcissist is doing is they are doing this thing where they're attempting to test your boundaries. So how this works is, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, what they might do is they might do something small to go over your boundaries, right? Like if you have a boundary with them, but it might be something small, like maybe it's not a big thing. What they're doing is they're testing you. They're testing you to see how you're going to toe the line with your boundaries. And then the next time they might go a little bit harder. They might cross your boundaries a little bit deeper. They might do that. And so what we know is that it becomes a cycle, but in the cycle, the cycle becomes deeper and deeper each time you go around. And what often will happen is the emotional abuse turns into physical abuse.
Right.
So I think that's
sense.
really important. None of that happened to me, but I just want to be really clear that that is definitely, all of that is definitely, that's all very real stuff.
Absolutely. And we know from batterers and child molesters, etc., that so many of the things that they do is often covered under narcissism, whether they're ever diagnosed with that or not. But the whole nature of needing to be in control and testing those boundaries, it could be seen as testing, or it could be seen as teaching. Right. I'm going to go past this boundary and I'm going to see what you do. And I'm going to show you that I can go past that boundary and you need to accept it. And then I'm going to go past the next one and the next one and the next one. And eventually they have taught this person who might have had really clear boundaries to begin with, that has just given up and given over everything, and they have total control. Did you go no contact?
That was the other thing that I wanted to say, is that the other thing I want to tell anyone who is considering being in leaving, is who thinks that they're in one of these relationships and is considering leaving. If you can at all, possibly, you need to cut off every form of connection with this person. And unfortunately, if you are married to this person and you have children with them, that makes that situation impossible, which sucks. But the only way to have a relationship with a narcissist is to have no relationship with them. I literally have not spoken to this person since the day that I ended the relationship. There's been a couple of times. There was one time where I think like I ran into him in the street. And there was one time where he emailed me to say that he had been in therapy and that he had some answers if I was interested in having a conversation with him, but I chose not to do that at that time. And the reason why is because there were so many lies that it didn't really make any difference to me. While I appreciated the offer of clarity and closure, at that point, I had enough closure on my own that I felt okay. And secondly, I felt like there was no world in which I could live where anything that came out of his mouth was believable, because there had been so many lies that there was no way I could trust anything he said, right? He could say the things that I thought and I believed that I wanted to hear, but maybe he was just saying those things. And he was such a skillful liar. I can't emphasize that enough. And again, not every narcissist is, but he was such a skillful liar that there's no way, there's no world that exists where I could believe anything that came out of his mouth.
Yeah. How are you doing on your self-confidence? You talked about that being one of the biggest things that was broken for you.
Yeah.
Did you, I'm assuming, because of how I'm talking to you and how you're talking back to me, that you have self-confidence at this point. I don't think you could be this kind of way without it. What did you do to develop it back?
So I think that, there was a lot of validation in learning about, and there's a few other things that happened that I won't go into, that really validated my experience. One of them, and again, not to go into this in much detail, but one of them was that I did get in touch with some other women that he had dated in the past. And what I found was that there was a pattern. And it was a very clear pattern. And so that was really validating to me as well. And so when you start to feel validated, like, oh my God, those gut feelings that I had, those were real.
Right.
those were true, right? That really starts to build your self-esteem back up in
Yes.
some ways. I mean, there's still a lot of shame, right? Because you're like, how could I possibly have gotten taken advantage of by this person? You know, like sometimes when I look at those red flags at the beginning of the relationship, I just want to hang my head in shame because I'm like, if one of my girlfriends came to me and said, you know, this guy I'm dating did this, I would be like, dude, leave him. Do not pass go. You know what I mean? But
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
but I was, you know, I was sucked in. 100% I was.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I think I'm good now. There are things that I still struggle with for sure. There's this thing Dr. Romani talks about called rumination, where, you know, sometimes in your brain, like you can't kind of turn your brain off. Like you think, what if I ran into that person on the street today? What would I do? Like, would I punch him in the face? You know, like would I have empathy for him? Like, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, so there's that stuff that sometimes my brain goes down that rabbit hole because I have a rabbit hole kind of brain.
Oh, we all have a rabbit hole
Right.
in our brains.
Or I call it the hamster wheel, right? I'm on the hamster wheel.
You talked about when you first broke it off that it was difficult. What was that like for folks? I just want people to know how it can be. I know what it's like for people who've been abused in therapy abuse and had that same kind of love bombing having happened and the same kind of things happen. But and it's horrible. It is actually, you know, it's a really, really hard place to be in. How was it for you?
I think one of the really challenging things I was very depressed for several months. Like I was in not a very good mental headspace, to be honest with you. But I think the other thing that is really worth mentioning is that when you're in a relationship like that, I think a great deal of your self-image of who you are gets tied up in that relationship. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like you're that person's partner
and
how you
soul
behave,
person. This was the person you were going to be with for
right?
the rest of your
How
life.
you behave, how you act, so much of that is involved in that persona of who you are. And now that person is gone from your life, and you have to figure out who you are in the world without that person. And I think that's a really difficult thing, and that's a real struggle. And I think, you know, that for me has been really an ongoing process over the last few years. And what I've come to realize is that it's not just about that particular situation, but also about my childhood and how I was raised. And I was raised in a very specific way to be a very specific person. And even though I rejected all of that at some point in my late 20s, early 30s, the process of me still continuing to discover who I really am on the inside as a human being, that is a process that's, you know, started again and I'm still going through to this day.
We have to stop here, Rebecca. I'm so sorry. I feel like we just got started talking about it. But thank you for sharing all of that with our listeners here about narcissism and how it impacted on you and what you went through. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I just want to really recommend, if your listeners are really interested in this topic, or if they think that they may be in a narcissistic relationship, I just really want to recommend Dr. Romani's podcast and also her YouTube channel. Just Google it.
Right. How do you spell Romani?
I think it's Ramani. I think. I'm not 100% sure.
We will track it down and put it on our resource page.
Yeah, I just really she also has a book. I just really want to recommend that. It's been a really big help to me personally. And I think it could really be a big help to other people as well.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. You've been listening to Rethreading Madness. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I have chatted just now with Rebecca about her firsthand experience of a person with narcissism. I would like to reiterate that neither Rebecca or I are therapists or diagnosticians, but even as laymen or laywomen, it is important we understand enough about the narcissist that we can see them, know them, and avoid becoming victims of their narcissistic behavior. I will be posting links on Dr. Ramani's videos that Rebecca mentioned if you are wanting to follow up on her suggestion. Remember, a narcissist will most likely never take responsibility for their behavior or even at times events in their lives. They will therefore opt to make everything your fault and about your failings as a person. By understanding the framework of how narcissists operate, you will be able to pull the pieces of their manipulation apart and find your way out of their quagmire that they have created in your relationship with them. My thanks to Rebecca for chatting with me about her experience of narcissism, to Sherry Ulrich, Carly Simon, and Taylor Swift for the gift of their music. But most importantly, my thanks goes out to you for joining us today. Stay safe out there. I'm Bernadine Fox, and you've just listened to Rethreading Madness, the podcast that dares to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program or want to share your story or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. If you enjoyed this show, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through. Just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights, and it's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe it when you tell me everything's gonna be alright? Yeah. Why don't I wonder how you know? Well, surely you don't have all of the facts. You could be just making it up. Why don't I ever think of that? It's some kind of magic in the words that you breathe, saying, baby, take it from me. It's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe it when you tell me everything's gonna be alright? Everything's gonna be alright. With anyone else, it's such a cliche, just words people say to be nice. Or some